Okay, today we're cleaning the machine. A few things we want to go over before we do that. One, you're going to want to turn off the machine, the heating element, as early as possible in order to let the oil cool down so you don't burn yourself. A lot of this can be a little bit dangerous if you don't take your time and sort of and be careful. You're going to want to use gloves and paper towels when possible. The first thing we're going to focus on here is disassembly. So you're going to want to make sure you shut the machine off at the right time. Right now you can see how the flippers are up. That is not what you want. So at the end of the day here, you're going to see once they all go all down and they're properly down like that, that's when we want to shut it off. So they are all fully down. It won't cause any problems here. You're going to want to take this off. Ours is clean right now. It's already been cleaned, but typically this is going to be dirty. So what you're going to want to do is pop this up, holding it, and then you're going to release this latch. So as you pull it away, you're going to put your hand under here in order to make it so the batter does not come out, and you're going to take that back to dish. Now ours is clean, so we don't have to worry about that right now. Second thing we're going to want to do is make sure that the temperature is all the way down, okay? So once the temperature is all the way down, we've removed the hopper, we're going to detach all of our motors here. So we're going to remove this. It should come out slightly with a little bit of finesse. There we go. The slower you do that, the less likely it is going to splash. Detach this. And these typically can all be set to the side to be cleaned and wiped down. Right here. Next, you're going to remove this splash guard here for the filters. So those filters need to be taken out and cleaned every day anyways. So make sure you have somebody clean those out. The next part we're going to do is you're going to have your pliers here. So we're going to remove a couple of the components here in order to get those cleaned. So first is going to be the flipper. That comes right up and off. Set that down in there. Then our wheel. You have to be careful. It's going to have some oil dripping off it, so just be careful. Alright. Now there's a couple other components in here that do come out. I tend to remove them at this stage. You can wait until we move the whole tray back. So then we've got 4 different plates in here that you're going to want to be gentle with so that you don't scratch them. Got one more plate here that can be a little bit more difficult to get up. Just want to take your time with everything once again, not touching any of this with your hands because everything's going to be very hot. Even if you've let it sit for a while, it'll still burn you. Now before we remove the entire tray here, we're going to make sure that we get this out of here, the crumb collector sort of here at the end. You're going to want to put that down here with the rest of your components in order to be clean. This is how the machine looks before we've cleaned it. We've removed all of the components so you're able to get an idea of what it looks like before it's cleaned. Our next step is going to be removing the tray. This is one of the more tricky parts of this situation. What you're going to want to do is lift up on this end here first. You're going to want to do all of this very carefully. You're going to slowly tilt it to let the oil drain out at this end. Give it a couple of shakes because there is this little reservoir down here that doesn't allow it to go very well. Okay. Now the next part we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to set it down. Typically the toppings bar is going to be very close to the machine. So what we do is we lay down a bunch of paper towels, as you can see here. We put some wax paper underneath so that oil does not bleed through. And then you're going to slowly move your tray over there. Okay. And allow that to just sit. If it's not too hot, then there shouldn't be any issues. And you're going to let that sit and cool for a bit before we clean it. Our next step here is going to be siphoning out the oil. Now, what I'll say is the bucket that is provided, or the oil tin here, is basically it's not big enough to contain the entire amount of oil in here. So we're going to have to do two separate siphonings in order to remove all of the oil. Typically, this is where we leave ours underneath. So the first step is making sure your bucket down here lines up. And this is going to be fully closed at the bottom for the siphon. You're going to bring it up once, slowly. You'll see some bubbles come out in the oil. And then down. And you're going to go up slowly again. And down. Now you should see it start trickling out at this point. If it doesn't, just do it one more time. And once you get a steady stream, as I believe you'll see here in a moment, see here. Okay, so that is your, you want at least a fast stream like that. And what we're going to do is fill up this tin about 1/3 full. At 1/3 full, we're going to stop it and then remove that oil so that we don't end up having too much oil and then it overflows. If you come over here and take a look, you can see I stopped the oil for this first siphoning at a little bit less than half. As long as you don't go over half, then you shouldn't have any issues. You want to take a small amount because it's gonna, you'll see in this next step, we need to leave a certain amount of oil up here for the pressure in order for that siphon to happen a lot easier. Okay, now you're going to want to be careful with this siphon. All of the metal is going to be very hot, so you're not going to want to touch that. Make sure you keep your hand on the plastic. Once this drains a little bit, what you're going to want to do is cover up your oil down here, and then we're going to go and put it in our oil barrel wherever you are. Typically you're going to have a barrel where you dispose of the oil. All right, now I'm going to show you how to sort of safely put the oil in the oil barrel. Yours may look different than this. Sometimes it may have rained, so you have to be careful not to get yourself wet. First thing you want to do is remove the lid here. Now you're going to want to bring a paper towel with you. What you're going to do is tilt it a little bit. Use your hand with the paper towel because it's going to be hot. And lift up. Set it on the edge like this. And just be careful when you're pouring because it may splash up a bit. Now we're going to be doing this 2 times for the remainder of that oil. You're still going to want to put the lid on top of here because you don't want any kids falling in or anything like that. Okay, so for our next step for removing the remainder of the oil, the last 2/3 roughly, what we're going to do is you're going to want to take 2 trays, the typical trays that we put our donuts on. And you're going to want, we're going to basically slide it in over here underneath the machine in order to get a tilt so that it makes it easier to siphon off the remainder. So what you're going to want to do is I take a paper towel in my right hand here, get these trays sort of positioned right here. You're going to want to do this very carefully. You're going to lift up this end until you get this underneath. Okay, so once we get our trays underneath, you typically grab this and slowly twist it and slide those in. So the most difficult part is sort of positioning these trays to get under this one peg right here. Now you'll see we have our machine slanted so that when we siphon, it is going to grab most of the oil so that you don't need to wipe it all up. For the next step here, we're just going to remove the oil the same way we did in the beginning. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. If you don't have enough oil left up in here, the pressure sometimes isn't going to be as great as it was first time, which can make it a little bit more difficult to siphon. Sometimes you'll have to do 3 or 4 pumps, but you just want to do it slowly and delicately, and you'll eventually get the siphon going. There you go. As you can see, it took about 4 or 5 that time. But once you get a strong, steady stream like that, then you're good. And you're going to let this run out until it stops siphoning on its own. Okay. Now that we've removed the majority of the oil out of our pan here, what we're going to do is I usually take paper towels in order to soak up the remainder of the oil. There's going to be a small hole in here. It's going to be very hot, so be careful, especially when you're removing those paper towels. You're going to do your best to sort of wipe all this out, because we're going to be taking this tray back into the sink, and so we don't want to pour that down the drain. And you're also going to be removing all of the oil by putting it in the oil barrel like we did before. Once we've disposed of all the oil in the oil barrel, I'll show you how we wash everything in the sink. Okay, so now that I've cleaned out the majority of our pan here with paper towels, I've taken the heating element, set it to the side here. It usually will fit right in this little slot. Be careful, because it can still be very hot. Fortunately, mine is not. But a lot of the time it will be. So you're going to want to use paper towels and gloves for the majority of this. We're going to remove this pan, this tray, as best we can, so we can take it back to dish and clean it thoroughly. After we've moved our tray back here to the sink area, the best way when you set it down for there to be no problems, it should sit flush and flat. There are flipping mechanisms underneath, so if you set it down incorrectly, it's going to be off tilt, which you're not going to want. So you want to set it down where our binding's right here in the center, open, and not being there's no pressure being applied to them. So once this is flat, you're able to remove these parts now. These are what hold our wheel in place. So it's going to look flush with the machine, but you're just going to pop them up. There's one on each side, and they typically should pop up pretty easily. You can see ours has a little bit of gunk on them, so we're going to be cleaning all that off today. Okay, so for our cleaning, we're going to be using a soft sponge like this, not one of the wire mesh ones. You don't want to use the green edged ones. The reason being, it will damage the metal microscopically, which over time will allow for this oil to sort of get caked in and become more and more difficult to remove. So first thing we're going to do is use this grease remover on all our problem areas. These types of areas where you can see that the grease is hardened and it's difficult to come off. So we're going to use our Pro Force here. We're going to spray this on. You're going to want to use these gloves because this stuff you don't want to get on your skin. Spray it onto all your sort of tough grease areas. Any of these parts that have a bunch of grease on them, you're going to want to cover up as well. And then let all of this sit for about 5 minutes. Afterwards, we're going to clean all of this off. We're going to rinse it, then we're going to use a sponge with soap and basically scrub it until it's clean. But this stuff sort of helps take the edge off. Now, as you're cleaning, when you come across these problem spots that the Pro Force does not get out, neither does the sponge. Sometimes you can use either usually we would have a razor. It would have a plastic handle. Sometimes you might have the razor right here on top. We do not have one of those currently, but you would want to use some type of metal to scrape this off. Currently I'm using this, and you'll see how it just peels it right off. So you're going to want to continue to do that until you get it all the way off. Okay, now that we have all of our components dried, the tray is dried, we're just going to get all of our pieces, put them back together. Now with the levers here, we want to make sure if they are trouble, you want to remove them before you clean, which I did not go over earlier. Which underneath we have our linkage, so these would come off. The way to put them on is to have this up, slide these underneath until we have them link right over the edge. And then the way we know that they're working is they should sit down and you should see that sort of leverage there. Okay? So once these are all put back on, we're going to put all of these components back in here. So the first piece you want to put on is this. The tricky part about this, you want to make sure that you're not overlapping any of these flapper links here. So make sure they're all still able to go up with no problems. So this thing is down. Let's make sure that is okay. Okay, so now as we're putting these pieces back on, the double slatted piece is always going to line up with where our motors sync up. So the thicker piece, pop on here like so. Whoop. And that slides down in there. Same with this other one. And now those are both in. Okay, our next steps are putting in that plate. Then our two smaller plates are going to go right here, right after that. Then we have our longer plates, which these ones have a little bit of finesse to set them down in there. There's not much wiggle room. Okay, so now that those are all in, I'm going to put this down. And then lastly, our wheel. So that should sort of spin freely there. And then now that this is all ready and dried, we're going to be able to set it into our into the machine after we've heated up all of the oil. Okay, so we've got our bin, our tray here has been all cleaned. So we're going to set this heating element back in. Now if you come over here and take a look, you'll see this placement right here, this little lip. There's a button back here if you can hear it. That button needs to be pressed in order for the heating element to turn on. So when you set this over the lip, you've got to make sure that it's sitting right on there just right. So you'll hear it, set it down, and you'll know that it's in there and we're ready to heat up all of our oil. Okay, now before we start heating up the shortening, you're going to want to make sure that you've filled this up sufficiently so that the heating element down there, the coil, has been completely covered up. So we're doing that before we ever turn it on. Now if you have turned it off, this is how you turn the machine back on. There's these switches down here that shut it off. If we do the center, if we push it down towards where it says test, there's a button in the back here. While it's on test, when you press it, it'll turn it on. So we're going to make sure we've turned it on. Now we're going to come over here and we're turning our temperature up to 375. You do not want to do 400. It could cause problems for the machine. 375 where it's supposed to be all day anyways. So you're going to want to turn it up right there. You might see a little bit of smoke here at the beginning. A little bit of smoke is okay. Fortunately, it's going to melt the shortening and completely cover up so it distributes the heat. So you're not going to have any heating issues there as long as you have enough shortening. Now once you have your oil sort of melted up to about this point, I'd say it's roughly 2 inches below, you do not want to add too much oil. For the reason of, you can take a look right now and we'll see as we turn this, it'll tell us what temperature our oil is at, which it's telling us it's roughly 200. So it's still got about 175 degrees to go. What will happen here is that this liquid oil is going to expand even more. It's going to take up more placement. Since we're going to set our tray in there, if you filled this up to where it is supposed to be right now, then by the time it expands at 375, it could end up overflowing. So it's always best to do less as opposed to more as you fill this up. So when it's about 2 inches or so there, we're going to take our tray. Now what we want to do is set this left end in slowly, and then we're going to slowly lower it because there's going to be this oil displacement that's going to come over everything else, as you can see here. So this should sit in sort of flush, no issues. And then as we see here, we're below the line. I'd say we're a good 3/4 of an inch below the line of where it should be. So at this point, you're going to allow it to expand all the way up. It should be a lot closer to that line once it's expanded. So now we're going to put all of our machinery back on here, all of our motors, and do one last test before we leave to make sure that everything is running properly for whoever comes in the morning. Okay, so I'm putting the hopper right back on here. You're going to slide it down. That should sit loosely. Careful it doesn't swing into the glass here. So we take that, we're going to put that back in the proper spot where it says hopper here. You're going to screw that back on. Now we're going to take our motor here. It should sit nicely there on the edge, not too tight. Underneath here, if you feel around, there's going to be an outlet. That's going to pop up in there. It's the only one available. And then lastly, we have our motor here. We are going to set this. First, you want to hook this right there. Then lift up slowly. You'll see it pulls all of the flippers up, and then sit it down. When it's sitting down like that, we know that it's in the right position, and then we're going to plug this back in. Okay, now that we have all of our pieces reassembled here, you basically want to give this thing a test run before you leave for the night, just for whoever's coming in the morning, just to make sure there aren't any issues. So we turn it on. As long as there's enough oil for this to be pushing, there should be no issues here. So we just make sure that the flippers work properly. There they go. So they're working smoothly. Before this, when we went to test it, they seemed to be jerking a bit. So I took every piece off, picked up the tray, made sure the linkage underneath wasn't being binded or anything. And once we set it back down in, it definitely smoothed up the flippers. So sometimes it takes a bit of finesse when you're setting it back down in here, but you don't want to have any issues for the person in the morning. So once this is all good to go, then we can make sure we shut it off in the right position. After it goes all the way down. Okay, flip our switches, turn our heating element off. As long as it's a little low, the person in the morning can add a little bit more. It's a lot easier than having to remove it. So then we just go down here, flip our switch, and make sure everything's clean for the morning. Now that we have the tray set in, all of our equipment is set up, we're going to want to make sure we put the crumb catcher down in here. Now, as you assemble all of this, you're going to hear some pops. That is just going to be the water. So it's okay to hear it pop and crackle a little bit. It's just typically going to be the water evaporating from the hot oil. Sometimes you just want to step back a bit.